puberty, when we suddenly gain our height and the bones increase in size, there is increased synthesis of the organic matrix, and these cells are most active. Osteoblasts are most active. Hence, the serum alkaline phosphatase level in the blood would be very high. The other place where serum alkaline phosphatase level would be high is when there is blockage or obstruction of the biliary canaliculi or the biliary tree or the bile duct. So when we do not have the facility of doing the isoenzyme studies, whether it is from the bone or from the liver, then you should always do a gamma glutamyl transferase enzyme, GGT, to see whether the alkaline phosphatase is of liver origin or not. If GGT is not raised, that means this alkaline phosphatase, especially in a child in a pubertal age group, is from the osteoblast, and there is nothing to worry about. So this is the Haversian canal which we can see, and you can see these are the osteocytes which are connected with each other between the lacunae, with each other through the bony cavity, and this is the cement of the bone which is there. So these are the osteocytes which have cytoplasmic processes which are called as the phylopodal processes. So inactive osteoblasts are surrounded by the bony matrix, and they are called as the osteocytes. So they get embedded inside the bony matrix and seem to be present within a lacunae. So these are the osteocytes. What do? They are not inactive. They appear seemingly inactive, but they maintain the bony matrix. These long cytoplasmic processes of the osteocytes are housed in the thin canaliculi, and the nutrition reaches through these canaliculi to the bone. And these are the ones which help in controlling the fluctuation of the serum levels of the calcium and phosphorus by either resorption or increased uptake of these two minerals, the calcium and the phosphorus. So what are osteoclasts? Osteoclasts, as I have told you, these are the multinucleated giant cells. So physiological giant cells which are present. The other physiological giant cell is a megakaryocyte. Now these osteoclasts are derived from the granulocyte monocyte precursor cell present in the bone marrow itself. So they would be positive for the monocyte immunohistochemical stain CD68 and responsible for resorption of the bone. So they help in not only excessive bony resorption, but also in remodeling of the bone when the fracture repair is occurring. So they have ruffled cytoplasmic border, and they keep in contact with the bone, and they are housed in the lacunae, which are called as the house-shaped lacunae. So osteoclasts are present in the house-shaped lacunae, and they help in bone resorption. Now, what is bony matrix formed of? The bone matrix has two components. It has the inorganic matter, which is the predominant component, forming roughly 65% of the entire bony matrix, and the organic matter, which forms 35% of the entire bony matrix. The inorganic matrix is the calcium and the phosphorus, predominantly. The other inorganic compounds which can be seen are the bicarbonate, citrate, magnesium, potassium, and sodium in minor amounts. The predominant inorganic substances which are present are the calcium and the phosphorus. And what do they form? They form the hydroxyapatite crystals which are there. And this is the chemical formula for the hydroxyapatite crystals. So hydroxyl ion, calcium 10, and the phosphatase ion, phosphatase which is 6 in number. So these form the important inorganic matter which is present. So any disturbance in the calcium and phosphate metabolism will affect the inorganic matter, and the patient can present with bony abnormalities. Right? And what is the organic matter? The organic matter are both the cells as well as the collagenous substance which is secreted by these bone forming cells or the osteoblasts, and the proteoglycans which are formed by the osteoblasts, and the glycoproteins. Which are the proteoglycans chiefly present in the bone and cartilage? In cartilage, we have the chondroitin sulfate and the heparin sulfate. And the glycoproteins which are present are the xyloproteins, osteopontin, osteonectin. They also secrete, the bone forming cells also secrete the growth factors and the cytokines, which help in maintaining the normal hemostasis of the bone and the component of the organic matter as well. So bone forming cells not only form all these substances, they also are affected by the growth factors and the cytokines and maintain the normal homeostasis of the bony matrix in the body. So this was about the normal physiology and normal histology of the bone. And now we go on to what is occurring in the bone. The most common effect or the disease or the lesion that you see in the bone and you commonly encounter is a discontinuity in the bone. So this is the most common disorder which is affecting the bone, which is the discontinuity of the bone, also called as fracture of the bone. And generally, this is the symbol which is used by the orthopedic surgeons to denote the fracture. Fine. So this is the fracture of the bone, which is by definition a discontinuity of the bone. The discontinuity may be complete or incomplete. So if there is a complete breakage of the bone, it is a complete fracture. Incomplete breakage of the bone, also called as the green stick fracture, usually occurs in small children. It does not occur in adults. In adults, it leads to generally a complete fracturation, complete discontinuity of the bone. Right? So an incomplete fracture, because when you try to break a small green stick of any plant, it does not break it out completely. It remains attached at the periphery. So that is called as the incomplete fracture or a green stick fracture, which is seen generally in children. A fracture may be simple or it may be compound. A simple fracture is the one in which there is a discontinuity of the bone. However, the overlying skin and subcutaneous tissue is intact. So the fractured part of the bone is not in direct continuation to the outside of the body. Overlying skin is completely intact. While in a compound fracture, it will be in communication with the skin and the fractured part of the bone may be seen coming out of the skin. So as a result, we can simply understand it will be difficult to treat a compound fracture and it will be easier to treat a simple fracture where there is no overlying skin being affected. Sometimes the discontinuity may be in multiple fragments. So it is not just one break which has occurred, it has occurred into multiple small fragments, and that is called as the splintered fracture or comminuted fracture. These multiple fragments, or even if it is a single fragment, single discontinuity, they may be lying adjacent to each other, so they are not displaced. They have only broken down, but they are lying at the same site. So then it is easier to treat them. However, if it is a displaced fracture, you will have to bring back all the fragments in continuity with each other before you start treating the fracture by a splint or by putting a cast. Many a times there can be a slowly developing fracture called as the stress fracture, which occurs during the sports training or in soldiers when they are going for long march. So long marches of the soldiers, which is a slowly developing fracture due to physical stress, is called as the stress fracture. A discontinuity of the bone, which occurs because the bone is diseased. If the bone which has fractured has an underlying disease, maybe a tumor from the same site, maybe a tumor from a metastatic site, or it is simply weak, there is osteoporosis or osteomalacia which has occurred, the bone mass is not, it's not dense enough, so a simple trauma will lead to a fracture. So such fractures in which there is, the bone is not normal, there is an underlying disorder of the bone and that has predisposed the patient to have a fracture is called as the pathological fracture. So when you do an X-ray of the bone to look at for fracture, you not only look at the type of the fracture, whether it is complete or incomplete, whether on clinical examination you can see whether it is coming out through the skin or not, or it is a compound fracture when it is coming out of the skin. It is only a single complete break or there are multiple fragments which have occurred, which will be called as the comminuted fracture. Are the fragments in line with each other as the normal bone, or they have been displaced into the surrounding soft tissue? So all this information will help you in treating the patient better. And a vocational history like the sports training, or a patient is an army person or a defense person going for long marches. So all this will help you in making a diagnosis of a slowly developing fracture, which is called as the stress fracture. And if you see the underlying bone, which has a lytic lesion or a plastic lesion, an irregular lesion which is present in the bone, and the bone has fractured at the site of the weakening because of the underlying pathology, then it is called as the pathological fracture. Maybe there is an underlying tumor and the bone has got weakened up and that has undergone a fracture, so that will be called as the pathology. Now, how does the fracture repair itself? Like in the skin, like in any other part of the body. So if you have a healing by primary intention or healing by secondary intention, So it will entirely depend upon how big the fracture is and what is happening. So we know that immediately what will occur at the site of the fracture is there will be presence of blood because of the breakage of the capillaries at the site of the fracture. So at the site of the fracture, the capillaries would and the blood vessels would have also been fractured, would have been broken down. So the fractured site would be immediately filled up with a lot of blood, so a hematoma will form. Collection of blood at the site of the injury will be called as the hematoma formation. So that will be the first thing that will occur. So what does the body do in response to it? The body tries to send its army, which is formed of the neutrophils. So the first line of defense cells which will come is the neutrophils. So there will be neutrophils which will come inside it and they will form the fracture event. So the hematoma will occur. The hematoma, the blood will get clotted over here. The blood, our vessels have broken down. The blood has come and tried to seal itself by forming a clot at this site. So this clot will help in not only filling up the gap, but also fibrin formed from the fibrinogen will form a meshwork of a thin fibrin meshwork which will be formed, and that framework will be present to trap the inflammatory cells, predominantly neutrophils. So the neutrophils will come in, and within 48 hours, there will be lymphocytes and macrophages which will be coming. Then what will happen? From the breakage site and from the marrow itself and from the subcutaneous tissue, and if overlying skin is involved, there will be ingrowth of fibroblasts and capillaries from the marrow stroma or from the surrounding stroma which will be there. So neoangiogenesis will occur, neofibrogenesis will occur, and that will stimulate proliferation of a granulation. So what will it occur? It will form new blood vessels, inflammatory cells, and presence of fibroblasts, and plump fibroblasts are called as the myofibroblasts because they have myosin in it. So that occurs and it leads to formation of a kind of a granulation tissue on it. So how does it help? So the gap which was filled by the blood clot initially, within a couple of days it is filled up by granulation tissue, and these fibroblasts and myofibroblasts will start laying the collagen fibrils over here. So there will be new vascularization from the surrounding marrow and from the surrounding subcutaneous tissue and the fascia, and presence of new collagen formation which will be there. Along with this, there will be release of platelet-derived growth factor, transforming growth factor beta, fibroblastic growth factor, which will be secreted by the platelets and the inflammatory cells. They will activate the osteoprogenitor cells or the osteoblasts on the surface of this cortical bone. Once these osteoblasts are activated, they will form more of collagen and they will lay down the proteoglycans and the glycoproteins, and they will try to find the bone matrix so that this discontinuity is healed up. So there will be a formation of a procallus which occurs, which will be formed of fibroblast, uncalcified tissue, and this fusiform material will try to anchor the fractured ends of the bone, which is helped by your external intervention by giving a splint so that the bone does not move. A constant moving of the bone will disrupt this anchoring and will again lead to new hematoma formation, new blood vessel formation, and the process will start soon over. So the idea of splinting a fractured bone is to give continuity to this fusiform uncalcified tissue, which is called as the soft callus or a procallus or a fibrous callus, which would be. So after the soft callus or the procallus which has been formed, there will be new bone formation under the effect of the prostaglandin derived growth factor, transforming growth factor beta, fibroblast growth factor, because the osteoprogenitor cells have been activated and osteoblasts are activated. So once the osteoblasts are activated, new bone formation will occur, and there would be haphazardly placed osteoblasts both on the surface and inside of the bone. So hence it is called as the woven bone. So osteoprogenitor cells are activated. There is subperiosteal deposition of the woven bone. Along with that, there is formation of a hyaline cartilage by the chondroblast. And this hyaline cartilage, by the process of endochondral ossification along the fracture line, will form a bony callus. So it will be a fibrous callus, then a cartilaginous callus, and then it will slowly get transformed into a bony callus. So here we can see there is formation of the woven bone as shown by green. The cartilage which is being formed over here, which will undergo endochondral ossification and form the new bone. And there are these osteoclasts also. Now, if bone is being formed, then why are we needing osteoclasts? Because I just told you osteoclasts are required for resorption of the bone. They don't form the bone. So what they will do is this irregular dead pieces of bone which have occurred because of the fracture, they will resorb these irregular dead pieces of the bone. And if there is any bony tissue which is being formed irregularly and not in alignment of the previous bone, they will also help in resorption of that irregularly lying. So once all this has formed, so you can see that these woven bony trabeculae which have formed, some are getting in continuity with the previously lined cortical bone. It is there. So after a period of 3 to 4 weeks, the orthopedic surgeon tells you, okay, now you can start walking. Your leg has fractured, but after 3 to 4 weeks, you are allowed to walk, but do not bear much of weight. So because if you bear much of weight, this callus is still not strong enough to carry your whole weight. So you cannot bear the entire weight on it. But because of the less weight bearing, what will happen is this remodeling starts. You start bearing a little bit of weight, which slowly increases as you put more weight bearing on this area. As a result, all these bony trabeculae, which are the woven bones, will get aligned with the original bone and they will form a continuation of the bone over here itself. So the callus will mature to a bony callus. It will transmit the weight bearing forces. The excessive bony tissue which has been formed and is forming the fusiform structure will be resolved, and slowly the outline of the bone will be resumed, and the medullary cavity will also resume itself, so that the bone is only at the cortex. It is the cortical bone, the compact bone is only present in the periphery, and inside you get only the intertrabecular marrow. Okay, only the bony trabeculae and the marrow. So there is continuity of the marrow and continuity of the bone, so that in a perfectly healed fracture, you may not be able to tell after taking an X-ray of 8 to 10 weeks that where was the fracture. It should be so perfectly healed in a fracture repair. If the fracture is not repairing, what could be the causes? Many a times the patient will come to you in the OPD and say, I got a fracture and I got it repaired from this surgeon, this orthopedic surgeon या इस डॉक्टर के पास गया था और उसने तो मेरा पूरा हाथ ही खराब कर दिया. It is not healed properly and I have had deformity. The reason could be many. Inadequate immobilization. So if you are not immobilizing the fractured area and it is constantly rubbing onto the previous fracture site, so the continuity will not form itself. So adequate immobilization of the fractured site is very important. So if you are being given a sling, you have been told to do a bed rest, you have been told to do not to bear weight on the fractured bone, follow those instructions very carefully. Otherwise, there could be inadequate repair, delayed repair, or there may be deformities secondary. A fracture which is in multiple fragments, which is a comminuted fracture, which is in multiple fragments of the bone, and the bony bits are displaced with each other. You have to realign them using techniques of using the nails or the plates, and if you have not been able to completely realign them, then it would lead to delayed repair of the fracture. In cases of compound fractures, that means the fractured bits are coming out of the skin. So it is quite likely the environment can send it some infection through the fracture site inside the bone. So any infection into the fracture site, either because it is a compound fracture or there was a hematogenous spread of the infection because the patient had some infectious site somewhere, maybe a infected tooth which was there and bacteremia was occurring because of that, and the infection lodges itself, the bacteria lodge over there. So then there will be additional inflammation and necrosis, and that will lead to delayed repair because it would require additional antibiotic therapy according to the sensitivity reaction pattern of the bacteria which are causing the infection. And most importantly, our own body stores. Do I have adequate calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin stores? Can I heal the repaired area or not? How do I repair it? If I'm not taking adequate proteins, I'm not taking adequate minerals, I'm not taking adequate vitamins, how will the collagen be formed from the pro-collagen if there is a vitamin C deficiency? So your basic nutritional status prior to the fracture is an important factor which will lead to adequate repair or a delayed repair. If you have systemic infection, so systemic bacteremia may impair the fracture repair by causing infection. And if the patient is diabetic, he has atherosclerosis of the blood vessels leading to vascular insufficiency or a localized vascular insufficiency because of vascular stenosis at the part which is being supplied to the area where fracture has occurred. All this will lead to impaired repair of the fracture. So what can be the complications? One is there is a delayed union or delayed repair. Two, sometimes there may be no union. So the two bits are lying, but they are not unified itself. A small pseudo joint-like space may form in it, and that is called as the pseudoarthrosis. So there can be non-union, there can be delayed union, or there can be malunion, so that the deformity is left and it is not, the union has not occurred in the alignment in which the hand was supposed to, the bone was supposed to get realigned. So malunion, delayed union, non-union of the bone, and sometimes a false joint-like space created between the two fractured ends of the bone is called as the pseudoarthrosis, which is a rare complication. Anything you do not understand, please keep asking the questions. I would be glad to answer them. So I hope you have understood what is fracture. Fracture is a discontinuity of the bone. It can be complete or incomplete. It can be closed when the skin is not involved, or it can be a compound fracture when the fractured ends are protruding out through the skin. If it is occurred in multiple fragments, it is comminuted fracture. And if those multiple fragments or one fragment is displaced, we can call it a displaced fracture. If the underlying bone is having a pathology and fracture has occurred because of the weakening of the bone due to underlying pathology, that is called as the pathological fracture. And stress fractures are those which develop slowly over a period of days or weeks, like in excessive marching by the soldiers or during the sports train. So how does it repair? It forms a repair by forming a hematoma, then forming a soft fibrous callus, which is composed of the granulation tissue, neoangiogenesis, fibroblasts and myofibroblasts, and deposition of collagen. Slowly, it will undergo transformation to cartilage formation and new bone formation and endochondral ossification of the cartilage. So the soft callus will become into a bony callus, and once the new bone have formed over here, this bone will start aligning when we start bearing the weight in that area. So the weight bearing will determine the alignment in a perfect order, and the two ends of the compact bone will get aligned with the compact bone. So this woven bone will get converted into the compact bone and there will be continuity of the marrow itself. So not only outline of the bone will be restored, outline of the medullary cavity will be restored. And in cases when there is inadequate mobilization, inadequate splinting, recurrent displacement, inadequate nutritional status, so if we are malnourished with calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin deficiency, or if we have systemic infections, or there are underlying systemic diseases, metabolic diseases like diabetes, hypertension leading to vascular insufficiency, they can all lead to delayed unions, malunion, non-union, or formation of a false joint-like space called as the pseudoarthrosis. Fine, so that was about the repair of the fracture, and as you would realize it now, the factors are similar of healing of healing and repair that we did in our first semester. So the healing process is similar as to heal, and it is similar, and what are the systemic and local factors which affect the healing and repair of a fracture. So one should be able to enlist and enumerate the local factors and systemic factors of delayed repair. Then coming on to the topic of today, which is the inflammation of the bone. So inflammation of the bone is osteitis, inflammation of the marrow is myelitis, And because they usually occur together, we call it osteomyelitis. So what is osteomyelitis? Osteomyelitis is inflammation of the bone and marrow. And as we realize from our acute class on acute inflammation, it could be acute inflammation or it could be chronic inflammation. So if it is an acute inflammation in which the onset is sudden, the course is short, the inflammatory reaction pattern is neutrophilic, and the recovery is complete, then we call it as an acute osteomyelitis. A persistent acute inflammation or inflammation due to organisms which lead to chronic infections like tuberculosis is called as the chronic osteomyelitis. It can be a primary solitary focus in the bone, or it can occur because there is systemic bacteremia from any other area. Say bacterial endocarditis, there is bacteremia which is occurring because of the dislodgement of the infected emboli from the infected vegetations. So that can lead to systemic disease. Or maybe I have a tooth infection, and because of the rigorous brushing, hard chewing, the bacteria have ruptured some vessels, so bacteria have gone through those ruptured vessels into the systemic circulation, and I have systemic bacteremia leading to lodgement of these bacteria inside any of the bone, and they can proliferate over there, leading to acute osteomyelitis. So majority of the acute osteomyelitis are because of the bacteria, pus forming bacteria. So we call it acute pyogenic osteomyelitis, and 80 to 90% of acute pyogenic osteomyelitis are because of the pus forming bacteria Staphylococcus aureus. Less commonly, we have the other bacteria like E. coli, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, which can be seen in patients with genitourinary infections. So patients with UTI and all can also show bacteremia because of these infections like E. coli, Pseudomonas, and Klebsiella. And they can also be seen in intravenous drug uses. Infections due to Haemophilus influenza and group B streptococci are rare and uncommonly seen in patients with acute pyogenic osteomyelitis. So though we are giving you these percentages, we should realize that even after bacterial culture, blood culture, nearly 50% of the cases, no organisms may be isolated, so that you can make the diagnosis based on the clinical presentation of acute inflammation. So the signs of acute inflammation, which are rubor, tumor, dolor, calor, which is redness, increased heat, loss of function, pain, and systemic effects of acute inflammation with systemic fever, increase in acute phase reactants, neutrophilia in the peripheral blood, increased total leukocyte count. So all these features would be seen in acute pyogenic or bacterial osteomyelitis. Sometimes we can have mycobacteria spreading out into the body as a disseminated mycobacterial infection or disseminated tuberculosis, and they can go and lodge in any of the bone. While the most dangerous part of the bone where they can be lodged is the vertebra, because they can damage the vertebra, go into the intervertebral spaces and cause collapse of the vertebra, leading to symptoms of paraparesis and paraplegia, depending on where it is there. So what is pyogenic osteomyelitis? Pyogenic osteomyelitis is acute osteomyelitis due to pus forming bacteria, usually occur as a hematogenous spread. Sometimes it may be an extension from a contiguous site, say from an infected middle ear to the middle ear bone it can occur, or from the infected nasal bone it can occur, or from the sinuses it may be affecting. There could be direct implantation of these bacteria, say in a splintered or a comminuted fracture, which is also a compound one. So from the direct environment it would be there. 80 to 90% of the conditions are caused by Staphylococcus, while a minority are caused by E. coli, Pseudomonas, and Klebsiella in neonatal period. So in small kids within a month of the birth, group B streptococci and Haemophilus influenza are the predominant organisms which cause acute pyogenic osteomyelitis. Patients with sickle cell anemia are prone to infection by Salmonella bacteria. So this is important for you to remember, because this sometimes comes as your MCQ question in your entrance exam. So where do these bacteria lodge? The location where the bacteria lodge lodges will vary with the vascular circulation occurring in the bone. And the vascular circulation in the bone varies with the age of the person. In a neonate, the metaphyseal vessels penetrate the growth plate. So what will occur that the bacteria will lodge into the metaphysis. They will also penetrate the growth plate, and these so much of pus which is being formed back along with the bacteria, the neutrophilic infiltrate and exudate which has been formed, it will also damage the growth plate formed of the cartilage, and the child will grow with a bone of that side smaller in size because the growth is not occurring properly at that side. So there will be growth abnormality when this child grows up if there is destruction of the growth plate. In children, however, the metaphyseal blood vessels are not penetrating into the growth plate and they are present as U-shaped blood vessels. So there is slowing of circulation over here. When you take a U-turn also, you know that when you're driving your vehicle or driving your car, so you know at the U-turn, the blood slows down. So it lodges at the metaphyseal blood vessels because the blood circulation is less. There is a hairpin kind of a bend or a U kind of a bend which is there, and the location is there in the metaphysis. So pus will form in the metaphyseal area, and it may penetrate the cortex, break through the cortex at the metaphyseal location and form a subperiosteal abscess. In adults also, they get located into the metaphyseal vessel. But after the unification of the epiphysis with the metaphyseal vessels reunite with the epiphyseal vessels. So epiphysis also gets infected by spread of the bacteria from the metaphysis to the epiphysis. So not only the epiphyseal cartilage would be affected, it will also affect the underlying cartilaginous bone and may enter the joint cavity as well. So in adults, there could be simultaneously acute synovitis of the involved area from the metaphysis going on to the epiphysis, and then it may land up into the underlying into the synovial lining, which would be there. So what has happened? The bacteria has lodged into the bone, generally at the metaphysis, because in the metaphysis, the capillaries have a U-turn or a U-bend like pattern, called as the safety pin kind of a pattern or there, or called as the U-turn of the roads. So the bacteria has lodged over here, and because of the slowing of circulation, it gets time to attach to the endothelial cells and come out into the stroma around the blood vessels, into the loose connective tissue around the blood vessels. There they will proliferate, and as we know, as the bacteria proliferate, they have an effect of the neutrophil by chemotaxis. So the bacterial products act as chemotactic agents, and they call the neutrophils at the site of the inflammation. So migration of neutrophils occurs to the site of the inflammation, leading to accumulation of neutrophils over there. So there is a formation of acute inflammatory exudate over there with the presence of edema fluid, neutrophilic exudate, and these neutrophils, activated neutrophils, will secrete enzymes from their granules, leading to death of the cell. So the cell death will lead to death of the entrapped bone. So there is necrosis of the entrapped bone, and the necrotic bone is called as the sequestrum. So acute inflammatory exudate because of the chemotactic activation, chemotaxis of the neutrophils by the bacterial products, as well as the activation of complement pathway. So complement C3A and C5A will act as chemotactic agents for neutrophils. So the neutrophils will release their enzymes from the lysozymes, and that will cause heterolysis over there, leading to cell death. And the death of the entrapped bone is called as the sequestrum. The dead bone is called as the sequestrum. Now, does this pus remain over there? It can remain if the patient has come to you at that particular point of time. You have investigated him. You have found that the inflammation is localized at that part only. Because at this point of time, the patient is only complaining of difficulty in bearing the weight at that area or difficulty in movement. He doesn't have much pain at this site, but will have systemic signs of inflammation in the form of fever. Now, what happens to this all pus which has accumulated inside the bone, inside the marrow? So this will percolate through the shaft and will penetrate through the shaft, come out of the cortex, and it will lie between the cortex and the periosteum. So periosteum is a thin fibrous sheet. It has come out of the cortex and it will get accumulated beneath the periosteum. So it will lift the periosteum and get accumulated over there. So accumulation of pus and necrotic material beneath the periosteum is called as the subperiosteal abscess. Now, through the periosteum, the blood vessels are going inside the bone and supplying the blood. If there is so much of pus outside the blood vessels, it will cause pressure on the blood vessels. So there will be decrease in size of the arteries which are supplying the bone itself. So there will be impaired blood supply, leading to necrosis of a segment of the bone. Till now, there was only the entrapped trabeculae which were getting necrosed. Now, what has happened is the whole segment of the bone undergoes necrosis, and this segmental necrosis of the bone is called as the sequestration. What if we are not able to diagnose it at this stage also, because we know periosteum is very rich in nerves and vessels. So involvement of the nerves, excitation of the nerves, the patient now comes in acute pain. So you should be able to do an X-ray at this stage, see the periosteal abscess, drain the periosteal abscess, give appropriate antibiotic therapy to him, and stop the inflammation occurring at this stage. However, if the patient has not yet come to you or you have failed to diagnose it, then the periosteum will also burst and it will come out into the soft tissue, in the muscles, in the fascia, and that will lead to formation of an abscess in the soft tissue. If we have not diagnosed it at this stage, because now the abscess has formed and there is tumor or swelling of the soft tissue also occurring over there, then it will burst through the skin and there will be draining sinuses which will be formed. So the sequence is the bacteria localized in the bone, it will proliferate over there, attract the neutrophils and inflammatory cells by the bacterial products will be forming as the chemotactic agents. So neutrophils will accumulate and the entrapped bony trabeculae will undergo necrosis and there will be cell death. So this necrotic tissue will percolate along with the pus cells or the neutrophils through the shaft, break through the cortex and lift the periosteum, forming the subperiosteal abscess. Now subperiosteal abscess will in turn cause pressure on the blood vessels which are penetrating through the periosteum and giving blood supply to the bone, leading to a segment of the bone undergoing necrosis supplied by that artery, formation of a sequestrum vena. If we have not stopped it at this location, there will be formation of a soft tissue abscess and leading to draining sinuses over. So what are the complications which can occur? Sequestrum occurs. Now, any inflammation which goes beyond this time will also lead to formation and proliferation of the osteoblast. So the repair simultaneously starts occurring at this time, and the new bone which starts occurring around the abscess wall is called as the involucre. In adults and in small children, in neonates, where the metaphyseal vessels are in continuation with the epiphyseal vessels, it may spread to the epiphysis and then to the joint cavity, leading to acute septic arthritis or acute arthritis, which would be there. Here we can see that the segment of the bone has undergone necrosis. So this is the sequestrum. This whole cavity is filled of pus, which is now drained off, and the surface is covered by the new bone, which is called as the involucre. So what are the complications of osteomyelitis? Initially, osteomyelitis occurred because there was dissemination of infection from bacteremia somewhere else. Now, this part of the bone itself is now a source of bacteria and inflammation. So it will give spread out inflammation into the entire vascular system, leading to septicemia, and it may go on to endotoxic shock. Then it can go into the joint cavity, leading to acute bacterial arthritis. The bone over at this site may become weakened up, and the trauma of that to the weak bone will lead to fracture of the bone called as the pathological fracture. If the inflammation persists for weeks or sometimes even for months, so persistent acute inflammation will lead to chronic inflammation called as the chronic osteomyelitis. And whenever there is chronic inflammation, the liver is stimulated to secrete serum amyloid associated protein, which gets converted to amyloid associated protein, leading to secondary amyloidosis of AA type. And this secondary amyloidosis can involve the GI tract, it can involve the respiratory tract, and if it involves the kidney, it will be presenting with nephrotic syndrome. So fine. A patient with long-standing chronic osteomyelitis, or for that matter, any other chronic inflammation in the body, can lead to production of excessive serum amyloid associated protein causing amyloidosis, and this amyloidosis may present with secondary amyloidosis involving GI tract, liver, spleen, and involvement of the kidney presenting with nephrosis. The other complication that I told you was draining sinuses. So if the draining sinuses remain for a long duration, say weeks, months, and years, so the lining tract of these sinuses, the epithelium of the lining tract of the draining sinuses will be the epidermal squamous epithelial cells, which will undergo dysplastic changes over a period of time and can form squamous cell carcinoma over time. So the complications of osteomyelitis include septicemia, acute bacterial arthritis, pathological fractures, chronic osteomyelitis, formation of secondary amyloidosis associated with AA amyloid, and occurrence of squamous cell carcinoma. Then coming on to tubercular osteomyelitis. So tubercular osteomyelitis generally occurs in countries where the tuberculosis is endemic. So mostly in the underdeveloped or developing countries when it affects the adolescents and young adults, occurring as a secondary inflammation, usually secondary to pulmonary tuberculosis. So generally it is a disseminated form of tuberculosis from the pulmonary tuberculosis when it spreads to various parts of the body. In developed countries, it occurs in older patients, those who are immunocompromised or immunosuppressed. It could be a primary immunodeficiency or an acquired immunodeficiency like an HIV/AIDS patient, or patients who are receiving immunosuppressive treatment. Say they have got a transplant, renal transplant, or any other body organ transplant, and they are on immunosuppressive drugs, or patients who are diabetic also associated with immunosuppression. So how does the infection spread? Infection is usually hematogenous spread of infection from the primary site, which is usually the lung. There can be very rarely direct extension to the ribs and the vertebrae. Say it is pulmonary tuberculosis, it has gone into the lung, and then the covering of the lung, which is the pleura, which is in direct contact with the ribs. So there could be pleural tuberculosis, and then it can involve the periosteum of the ribs, and then can go into the ribs bone per se and can lead to osteomyelitis of the ribs. Or there could be a posterior extension into the vertebra, and there could be multiple vertebra involved in this case, including the involvement of the intervertebral ribs. Less commonly, they can spread via lymphatics to the bone. So what are the usual sites? The usual sites are the thoracic and the lumbar vertebra. So if it is the thoracic vertebra, we can expect the patient will have not only the bony deformities like kyphosis and scoliosis in the thoracic and lumbar spine involvement. By healing, when fibrosis will occur, when there are multiple direct continuity involvement of 2 to 3 vertebra, leading to collapse of the intervertebral space, and that can also lead to neurological symptoms like quadriparesis or paraparesis. So weakness of 2 limbs or 4 limbs, or there can be complete loss of sensation in all. Uncommonly, there can be involvement of knee joint and hip joint. So tuberculosis is associated with extensive areas of caseous necrosis, and this can spread through the medullary cavity of the bone into the intervertebral space, leading to collapse of the vertebral space, presenting with classical symptoms of back pain, decreased sensation in the lower legs, loss of control of urination and of micturition and bowel control, as well as unable to walk properly. So weakness of the limbs leading to paraparesis or complete loss of sensation, paraplegia may occur. So what are the complications? It can involve the adjacent joint leading to tubercular arthritis. It can lead to sinus tract formation. As a result, from the sinus tract, small bones of dead bone, which are the sequestrum, can be coming out and draining out of the sinuses, both in pyogenic meningitis as well as pyogenic osteomyelitis and tubercular osteomyelitis. Parts of the dead bone can get drained from the sinus tract. Now, if it is there in the vertebra, then not only will it penetrate the vertebral column, it will come out into the periosteum, to the surrounding bones and into the surrounding muscle, and the psoas muscle, when it is involved, it will drain along the psoas sheath and form a cold abscess. So there will be psoas abscess would be formed, and of course the spinal cord compression and secondary amyloidosis with AA protein formation. Uncommon infections of the bone include syphilis, which could be congenital syphilis leading to osteochondritis and periostitis. Acquired inflammation in syphilis occurs in tertiary stage in adults when the involvement is seen in the palate, in the nasal bones, in the skull and the extremities, or uncommonly on the medial and anterior surface of the tibia when there is extensive reactive periosteal new bone deposit. So that is called as the Saberschen. So what are the skeletal changes in syphilis? The skeletal changes in syphilis, which occurs with the infection of Trypanosoma pallidum, can occur in the tertiary stage of syphilis, involving the palate, nose, bones of the skull and of the extremities. In the extremities, it generally involves the anterior and medial surface of the tibia with massive reactive periosteal bone deposition called as the Saberschen. Right? So that can lead to it. This part of the lecture we will do it next time. So if you have any lecture, so the next topic will be developmental defects and metabolic bone diseases, in which we will cover osteoporosis, osteomalacia, differentiating between the two, and because of the hyperparathyroidism. So skeletal changes in hyperparathyroidism, that we will occur in the next class. Any questions? The pseudoarthrosis occur as a consequence of non-union only? Most of the times, yes, because of the non-union, because then the two ends of the bone have not united with each other, and the potential space which is there will form a false joint kind of a thing, and there will be extra movement between the two. So there may be a false joint formed between the shoulder joint and the elbow joint, if there is a fracture of the bone and the fracture of the humerus and the two ends have not united. Please tell woven bone. There is a compact bone in which we have seen that there is a formation of Haversian system, Haversian canal system, in which there is a alignment of the osteocytes in a very regular manner. While in a woven bone, which is the new bone formation, or which occurs when we are developing during our embryo stage and the fetal stage, there is irregularly placed osteocytes which are present in the bone. So that is called as the woven bone. Ultimately, that will get converted into a compact bone when there is transmission of the weight bearing forces, and then it will get realigned. Any other questions which I can take? So generally you get short notes on the process of repair of the fracture, factors affecting healing and repair of a fracture, both in which you have to mention the systemic factors as well as the local factors, complications, the skeletal changes in syphilis, and sometimes a short note on tubercular osteomyelitis and complications of etiopathogenesis of pyogenic osteomyelitis. So you should be tell the etiological agents and the mechanism of occurrence and spread of the inflammation in pyogenic osteomyelitis or acute osteomyelitis. So any questions till now? So thank you all very much. I hope you have understood the topic, but if there are still any questions left, we will cover them up. You can ask those questions in the next 2 more sessions of the bone and soft tissue and joints that we will take later on after your examination.